There is a viral video out there circulating of a man who says he is a university student and explains how he is saving hundreds of dollars on groceries. He does so by using a food bank, and he says that you can, quote, take as much as you want. This is coming at a time of unprecedented usage in food banks across the GTA, and has us asking the question about who gets to use a food bank? How do you limit that? Should you limit that? Meghan Nicholls is the CEO of Banks Mississauga and is with us this morning. Meghan, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, very glad to have you on the program. I want to use this as sort of a launching off opportunity for us to talk about food bank usage. We have heard about how demand has been very high at levels never before seen. Are you seeing within your own clientele people who you might question whether they are as needy as some in the line?
It's not really a question we ask ourselves because our purpose is to be open for folks who self-identify that they're having a hard time affording all the necessities of life. And so there's always going to be a couple of folks perhaps who try to take advantage. You know, back more than 10 years ago, we used to ask people to demonstrate their financial poverty, I guess, to be able to use the food bank. And we realized it was creating a barrier for people who were worried they wouldn't qualify. And so we stopped doing that. But even back at that time, it was less than 1% of people using the food bank who weren't, quote, eligible to use it. And so we made a decision just that, you know, to hunt down the 1% of people who might be taking advantage wasn't worth it for the sake of the 99% of people, to make it easier for them to access. And I think in this day of social media, it's easier to find sometimes bad actors who are bragging about perhaps what they've done, but we're not finding a consistent issue of people abusing the food bank across the network. What we're mostly finding is desperate people really coming to try to figure out how they can survive.
There is something about the way in which this is circulating on social media that seems to have touched a nerve where, you know, people are commenting that they live or work near a food bank and see, in some instances, people who are showing up with the latest phone, in the latest car, with the latest winter jacket. And that seems to touch a nerve. I recognize that is not everybody and most likely nowhere near the majority of food bank users. But how do you handle a situation when you see somebody who you suspect might not have the same level of need?
You know, it's funny. I'm coming up on 15 years at the food bank, and this is the question that I've probably answered the most over the years. There's something about us as humans when we've given generously to an organization or we're supporting something we believe it's intended for someone. We really want to make sure that it gets to the person that's intended for. But we don't know the circumstances that's brought someone to a food bank. Maybe the phone was a gift. Maybe the car they're coming in was borrowed from a neighbor or was handed down to them. Maybe they just lost their job. Maybe they come from a culture where moving to a new country and demonstrating that you have a car to your family back home is what you do to show that you're using their investment in you wisely. And so even I, as a person, have to check myself and say, I don't know the circumstances that bring someone to a food bank. We try to be clear to folks, we're here to serve people who are struggling financially. But I think what we should be more upset about is that 2 million people a month in Canada are using food banks, and that I'm serving in Mississauga the same number of people in a month that used to use the food bank in a year. And so instead of worrying about the couple of bad actors, we as a community, as a society, as a civilization, need to be saying something's gone horribly wrong when the way for such a huge part of our community to just meet their basic needs is to have to go to a food bank.
Yeah, it raises some very interesting questions. And I think that's what sort of most fascinates me about this, is that we live in a world that is perhaps far too often black and white, that it is either you're going to condemn somebody for actions or you're going to support them. And there's not often consideration of the gray, the nuance, the context. You're raising a lot of that in very succinct format, I would say. And thank you for doing that. What does it tell you broadly about, I mean, in the course of, as you say, doing this job for 15 years, in the way in which we interpret things and don't perhaps always think about the middle ground, the big, wide middle ground?
I don't think there's such a thing as the deserving and the undeserving poor. We don't have the concept of like, if you've sold all your worldly goods, if you're down to the last t-shirt you own, you got rid of your phone, you have a flip phone, now you're eligible to use a food bank. And so the person who's maintained some of those things they had perhaps before they lost their job, they're not eligible. I think for many of us, we've never experienced true poverty. We've never lived on the $1,300 a month that the Ontario Disability Support Program provides, while rent is $2,500. And so I don't think we know the kind of sacrifices, but also coping techniques that our neighbors living in poverty put in place to be able to survive this really, really challenging circumstance they're in. And so I think our focus at food banks should be the systemic. Why are so many people in our community having to use a food bank? And who do I need to talk to? What elected officials do I need to call? What change needs to happen in my community to decrease that number?
Meghan, thank you so much for your time this morning. We do appreciate it. There's Meghan Nicholls, who is the CEO of Food Banks Mississauga.